The Korean Mafia boss despised all elegant women, except the black maid at home, unaware who she really was. On the 27th of April, 2003, in the quiet town of Gimcheon, a flawless-looking mansion began showing subtle signs no one could explain, doors seeming out of place, old photographs preserved with unusual care, and the name of a foreign young woman written down long before she ever arrived in the country. But everything changed when an object hidden for more than 2 decades resurfaced, linking a well-known Korean family to a past that was never meant to return. And to this day, those who know the story claim it all began with one question. Why did that young woman carry the same necklace forgotten in an old photograph? Follow the channel, like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. The night bus pulls into Gimcheon Station at exactly 2:47 a.m., its tired engine groaning like an old man finally allowed to rest. Through the frosted window, a single passenger remains, a young black woman clutching a worn leather suitcase that has seen more countries than most people ever will. Amara Lewis presses her forehead against the cold glass, watching her breath create small clouds of fog that disappear as quickly as they form. In her other hand, she holds a crumpled letter with an address written in careful Hangul characters, the ink slightly smeared from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times during the 18-hour journey from Seoul. As she steps down onto the empty platform, the November wind cuts through her thin coat like a blade made of ice and loneliness. Gimcheon sleeps around her, a city of traditional hanok roofs mixed with modern glass buildings, all bathed in the amber glow of street lamps that seem to whisper secrets she doesn't yet understand. For a moment, just one fragile moment, her dark eyes reflect something that lives somewhere between exhausted hope and a fear she refuses to name. She has traveled 7,000 miles, carrying nothing but questions that have haunted her since childhood, questions her late foster mother whispered about on her deathbed. You came from somewhere else, child, somewhere that tried to erase you. The taxi driver who finally agrees to take her barely speaks, glancing at her through the rearview mirror with that particular expression she has learned to recognize in every country she's ever lived, curiosity mixed with discomfort, as if her very presence disrupts some unspoken order. When they arrive at the address, even the driver lets out a low whistle of surprise. The Kwan estate rises before them like a fortress of wealth and secrets, a sprawling modern mansion built with dark stone and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow manage to look both inviting and completely impenetrable at the same time. Amara pays the driver with bills she can barely afford to spare and walks toward the main gate, her suitcase wheels scraping against the perfect stone pathway like a violation of sacred silence. Before she can press the intercom, the door opens, and a woman in her early 50s appears. Han Juri, the head housekeeper, wearing a crisp uniform and an expression that reveals absolutely nothing. You're late, Juri says in English so perfect it feels rehearsed. Kwon Tae-seok doesn't tolerate delays. Inside, the mansion smells of expensive cedar wood and something else Amara can't quite identify. Perhaps the scent of carefully maintained appearances. The staff members who pass through the entrance hall don't greet her. They simply stare, their eyes following her like security cameras tracking an intruder. She notices a young man in a designer suit, Kwon Daon, the teenage son, pausing on the marble staircase to watch her with an expression that seems almost like recognition, though they've never met. He opens his mouth as if to speak, then thinks better of it, and disappears into the upper floors. Then she appears, Seo Min-kyung, the mistress of the house, descending the main staircase like a queen entering her throne room. She wears a cream silk hanbok, modernized with tailored lines, that probably cost more than Amara's entire year of living expenses. Her beauty is the kind that requires maintenance, discipline, and an iron will. Every hair in place, every movement calculated for maximum elegant impact. But it's her eyes that make Amara's breath catch. Cold, assessing eyes that seem to be measuring not just Amara's appearance, but her very right to exist in this space. So you're the one, Min-kyung says in Korean, not bothering to switch to English, knowing full well from the hiring documents that Amara is still learning the language. I don't understand why my husband approved this hiring. You're quite different from our usual standards. The pause before different stretches like an insult wrapped in silk. Juri translates quietly, her voice neutral, but Amara doesn't need the translation to understand. She has heard that particular tone in 7 different languages across 4 continents. She simply nods, keeping her spine straight, her dignity intact even as exhaustion threatens to buckle her knees. Dinner that first night is a surreal performance of wealth and unspoken tensions. Amara is instructed to stand in the corner of the dining room, not to serve, just to observe, to learn the household routines. She watches as Kwan Tae-seok enters, a man in his late 40s wearing a charcoal suit that screams understated power. He is handsome in that particular Korean way. Sharp jawline, styled hair touched with distinguished gray at the temples, and eyes that have seen things that would make weaker men flinch. He nods at his wife without warmth, acknowledges his son with a slight gesture, and then his gaze lands on Amara. For exactly 3 seconds, something flickers across his face. Surprise? Recognition? Fear? It vanishes so quickly Amara wonders if she imagined it. He doesn't speak to her, doesn't acknowledge her directly, but throughout the meal, she feels his attention returning to her like a compass needle drawn to true north against its will. The conversation at the table is in rapid Korean, too fast for Amara to follow, but she catches fragments. Business discussions, mentions of contracts, someone named Director Park, who is apparently causing problems. Min Kyung's voice grows sharp when discussing a property dispute in Gangnam, and Dawn barely touches his food, too busy scrolling through his phone with the characteristic disinterest of privileged youth. Then Amara sees it, the photograph above the fireplace. In this house of modern art and expensive minimalism, this one frame stands out, traditional and worn with age. A woman smiles from the photo, young and radiant, holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. The woman wears a necklace, a distinctive pendant of intertwined silver and jade, shaped like a crane in flight. Amara's hand instinctively goes to her pocket, where she has kept her most precious possession hidden since boarding the plane in New York, a necklace identical to the one in the photograph, the only item she has from her unknown past. The room suddenly feels too hot, too small. Her heart hammers against her ribs like a prisoner demanding release. The woman in the photo, there's something about her eyes, the shape of her smile, that makes Amara's own face feel like a mirror reflecting across decades. She grips the edge of the wall to steady herself, and that's when she notices. Tae-seok is watching her watch the photograph, his expression now completely unreadable, frozen like a mask carved from ice and ancient regrets. After dinner, Juri leads Amara through the maze-like corridors to the servants' quarters, a small but immaculately clean room with a single window overlooking the garden. "Rest tonight," Juri says, her voice softening slightly for the first time. "Tomorrow the real work begins. And girl," she pauses at the door, "whatever brought you here, whatever you think you're looking for, be careful. This house has a way of taking more than it gives." Amara wants to ask what she means, but Juri is already gone, leaving only the echo of her footsteps and a warning that feels like a prophecy. Alone finally, Amara pulls out the necklace, holding it up to the dim light. The jade crane catches the glow, seeming almost alive, and she remembers her foster mother's dying words. "Your real mother loved you so much, she died trying to protect you. That necklace. It's the only proof you ever existed to someone." Sleep doesn't come easily. Around midnight, Amara wanders the hallway, unable to shake the feeling that these walls know her somehow. That's when she hears it, Tae-seok's voice, low and tense, speaking on the phone in his study. The door is slightly ajar, and though she knows she shouldn't, Amara moves closer, her heart pounding. "Yes, she's here," Tae-seok says in Korean, his voice heavy with something that sounds like dread. "She entered the house without knowing, but when she discovers the truth, it will be too late." A pause. No, Min Kyung doesn't suspect yet, but she will. She always does. Another pause, longer this time. "The necklace. If she has the necklace, then there's no doubt. Everything we buried 23 years ago is standing in my house, breathing the same air as my family." Amara stumbles backward, her hand over her mouth to stop the gasp that threatens to escape. The corridor spins around her. 23 years. That's exactly how old she is. The necklace. The photograph. The way Tae-seok looked at her. She runs back to her room, closes the door, and slides down against it, the necklace clutched so tightly in her fist that the crane's wings bite into her palm. Outside her window, Kim Cheon sleeps peacefully, unaware that inside this mansion of secrets and expensive lies, a truth has just begun to wake up. A truth that someone very powerful hoped would stay buried forever. Morning breaks over Gimcheon like a wound that refuses to heal properly, the sky gray and hesitant, as if unsure whether to commit to daylight or retreat back into the safety of darkness. Amara hasn't slept more than 20 minutes at a time, her mind replaying Taeseok's phone conversation on an endless, torturous loop. Every time she closes her eyes, she sees the photograph above the fireplace, sees the necklace around that unknown woman's neck, feels the weight of 23 years of erased history pressing against her chest like a stone. At precisely 5:30 a.m., a sharp knock jolts her from the thin edge of consciousness she'd finally managed to reach. Han Juri stands in the doorway, already impeccably dressed, her face showing no trace of fatigue despite the ungodly hour. "Mrs. Seo wants to see you in the main sitting room," she says, her tone carrying a warning that doesn't need translation. Don't keep her waiting. The sitting room is a masterpiece of controlled elegance. Cream-colored walls adorned with traditional Korean landscape paintings worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Furniture that manages to look both modern and timeless. And windows that frame the garden outside like living paintings. Seo Min-kyung sits in a high-backed chair positioned to catch the morning light in a way that makes her look ethereal, almost untouchable. She wears a pale blue hanbok today, her hair pulled back so tightly it seems to stretch her face into a mask of permanent alertness. "Sit," Min-kyung commands in Korean, gesturing to a low cushion on the floor. Not a chair, Amara notes, but a cushion that forces her to physically look up at the woman who will now dictate every moment of her existence here. Juri translates, though the power dynamic needs no interpretation. What follows is a masterclass in psychological warfare, disguised as employment orientation. Min-kyung speaks for 47 minutes without pause, detailing every microscopic expectation of Amara's role in the household. The marble floors must be cleaned with specific circular motions, never back and forth. The silverware must be polished in a particular order, starting with the spoons, never the forks. Laundry must be separated not just by color and fabric, but by family member, and each person's clothes must be handled with different water temperatures, different detergents, different drying times. In this house, Min-kyung says, her voice smooth as poisoned honey, perfection is not an achievement. It is the minimum acceptable standard. You are not here because we need you. You are here because my husband, for reasons I cannot begin to fathom, decided to make an exception to every standard we have maintained for 15 years. She pauses, letting the words sink in like acid through fabric. Do not mistake his momentary curiosity for any form of security. One mistake, one violation of protocol, and you will find yourself on the next bus back to Seoul, then on the next plane back to whatever place you came from. Juri translates mechanically, but Amara catches something in the older woman's eyes. A flicker of sympathy, perhaps, or maybe just recognition of cruelty when she sees it. The other household staff members have gathered at the edges of the room, ostensibly performing their morning duties, but clearly present to witness this ritual humiliation. A young maid named Park Soo-jin watches with barely concealed satisfaction, as if Amara's presence has finally given her someone to feel superior to. The groundskeeper, an elderly man named Mr. Kim, keeps his eyes firmly on the plants he's watering, his face carefully neutral in the way of people who have learned that survival means strategic blindness. When Min-kyung finally dismisses her with a wave of her hand, the gesture one might use to shoo away an insect, Amara stands on legs that have gone numb from kneeling. She bows, as Juri had instructed her to do, keeping her spine straight, her dignity intact, even as something inside her screams against the injustice of being treated as less than human, for no reason other than being different, being other, being unwanted. The mansion reveals itself throughout that first full day as a labyrinth of secrets masquerading as domestic perfection. There are too many locked doors, not just in the private family quarters, which Amara expects, but in strange places like the East Wing corridor where no one seems to go, or the room at the end of the third-floor hallway that has no nameplate, no indication of purpose, just a heavy door with a lock that looks newer than anything else in the house. Amara is assigned to clean the second-floor library, a room lined floor to ceiling with books in Korean, English, Japanese, and Chinese, evidence of either extensive education or expensive decoration, possibly both. As she dusts the shelves, she notices something odd. Certain books have been removed recently, leaving clean rectangles on otherwise dusty surfaces. Someone has been selective about what information remains accessible in this house. Behind a row of economics textbooks, Her fingers brush against something unexpected. A small leather journal, old and worn, pushed so far back it's nearly invisible. Amara glances toward the door, her heart suddenly racing with the particular guilt of someone about to cross a line they know they shouldn't cross. The hallway remains empty, silent, except for the distant sound of vacuum cleaners and Min Kyung's voice berating someone in rapid Korean. The journal opens to pages that have been partially torn out, not neatly removed, but ripped away in what looks like panic or rage. The remaining entries are sparse, written in English with occasional Korean phrases mixed in. Most are mundane. Meeting with Director Park at 3 p.m., Daeon school performance, dentist appointment. But then, buried among the ordinary, a date circled in red ink, November 15th, 2001, with only 3 words written beside it. The baby disappeared. Amara's hands begin to shake. November 15th, 2001. She doesn't know her exact birth date. The foster system had assigned her one arbitrarily, but her medical records estimated she was born in late 2001 or early 2002. The room suddenly feels smaller, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves are pressing in to witness her discovery. "What are you doing?" The voice cuts through her thoughts like a knife through silk. Amara spins around, the journal still in her hands, to find Kwon Tae-seok standing in the doorway. He's dressed more casually than last night. Dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms marked with scars that speak of a past less refined than his present. His expression is unreadable, but his eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes, fix on the journal with an intensity that confirms she's found something she was never meant to see. Amara starts, her English faltering for the first time since arriving. "I was cleaning, and it was behind the books. I didn't mean—" "Put it back," Tae-seok says quietly, his English flawless but carrying an accent that makes each word sound deliberate, weighted with meaning. He doesn't move from the doorway, doesn't approach her, but his presence fills the room like smoke. That journal contains private family matters that don't concern you. But as Amara moves to replace the journal, Tae-seok's gaze drops to her neck, to the small chain visible above her collar, where the crane pendant hangs hidden beneath her shirt. She sees his jaw tighten, sees something like pain flash across his face before he locks it down behind that impenetrable mask of control. "Why do you wear that necklace?" he asks, his voice so soft it's almost gentle, which somehow makes the question more terrifying than any threat could be. Amara's hand instinctively goes to her throat, covering the chain. "It belonged to my mother," she says, the words coming out defensive, protective. "It's all I have of her." "Your mother," Tae-seok repeats, and the way he says it makes the words sound like a door opening onto something vast and dangerous. "And do you know who your mother was? Do you know anything about where you came from?" "No," Amara whispers, and suddenly she's crying. Not the careful, controlled tears of someone trying to maintain dignity, but the raw, desperate tears of a person who has spent their entire life being a question without an answer. "I don't know anything. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why you hired me. I don't know why that woman in the photograph is wearing the same necklace I have. I don't know anything except that ever since I arrived, everyone looks at me like I'm a ghost they thought they'd buried." The silence that follows stretches so long that Amara can hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Tae-seok stands motionless, and for just a moment, just one fragile, impossible moment, she sees something break through his careful control. Regret, guilt, fear, all of it swirling together in eyes that suddenly look much older than his face suggests. Then, the moment passes. The mask slides back into place. "Return to your duties," he says, his voice cold again, professional. He turns to leave, but pauses in the doorway, his back still to her. "And Miss Lewis, that necklace, keep it hidden. Not everyone in this house wants you to remember where it came from." He's gone before she can ask what he means, leaving her alone in the library with a torn journal, 1,000 questions, and the terrifying certainty that her presence in this house isn't coincidence. It's a carefully orchestrated collision with a past someone tried very hard to erase. The lie forms on Amara's tongue before her conscious mind fully commits to it, a desperate act of self-preservation, born from years of learning that truth, in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon used against you. 3 days have passed since Tae-seok's question about the necklace, 3 days of his eyes following her through corridors like a predator tracking prey, 3 days of Min Kyung's increasingly pointed observations about the foreign girl who seems to have forgotten her place. It happens during breakfast service, when Amara is pouring tea for the family with hands that have finally stopped trembling from exhaustion. Taeseok sets down his newspaper, the Korea Economic Daily she's learned to recognize, and addresses her directly in front of his wife and son, breaking the unspoken rule that servants exist as furniture, seen but never acknowledged. "Miss Lewis," he says, his voice carrying that particular quality of controlled casualness that powerful people use when they're about to spring a trap. "I've been meaning to ask, that necklace you wear, you mentioned it belonged to your mother. Tell me, what was her name?" The dining room goes silent. Min Kyung's teacup freezes halfway to her lips. Daeon looks up from his phone for the first time all morning, his teenage face suddenly alert, with the instinctive awareness that something important is happening. Even Han Juri, standing by the sideboard, goes completely still. Amara feels the weight of the crane pendant against her chest like a burning coal. She has practiced this moment in her mind 100 times since arriving, has rehearsed different versions of truth and evasion, but now, with 4 pairs of eyes dissecting her every micro-expression, the lie comes out smooth as silk. "I don't know her real name, sir. The necklace came from a distant relative. My foster mother said it belonged to someone in the family who passed away before I was born. A great aunt, maybe, or a cousin. The records were lost." It's a good lie. Plausible and vague enough to be difficult to disprove, but she watches Taeseok's face and knows with absolute certainty that he doesn't believe a single word. His eyes narrow just slightly, a muscle in his jaw twitches, and something that might be disappointment crosses his features before disappearing behind that infuriating mask of control. "I see," he says quietly, and those 2 words carry more weight than an entire interrogation. How convenient that records were lost. That seems to happen quite frequently in certain situations, doesn't it? Min Kyung sets down her teacup with a sharp clink that sounds like a period at the end of a sentence. "Taeseok, why are you interrogating the help about her jewelry?" Her voice drips with disdain, wrapped in false concern. "Surely you have more important matters requiring your attention than a servant's family history." But Taeseok ignores his wife, his attention still locked on Amara, with an intensity that makes her want to run, to hide, to disappear into the walls like the ghost everyone seems to think she is. "Keep it hidden," he says finally, echoing his warning from the library. "As I told you before, not everyone here wants you to have it." The rest of breakfast passes in suffocating silence. Amara retreats to the kitchen, her heart hammering so hard she can feel it in her throat. She has lied to him, has chosen deception over truth, and somehow this decision feels irreversible, like stepping onto a bridge that burns behind you as you walk. That afternoon, while the family is out, Taeseok at his office in downtown Gimcheon, Min Kyung at her weekly lunch with the wives of other prominent businessmen, Da-on at his elite private academy, Amara finds herself drawn to the one place she's been explicitly forbidden to enter, Taeseok's private study. The door is locked, but the window beside it has been left slightly ajar, and Amara has spent her entire life learning how to become small, how to slip through spaces that weren't meant for her. She tells herself she's cleaning the hallway, that she's just checking if the room needs attention, but her hands are already working the window open wider, her body already climbing through with the practiced efficiency of someone who has had to break rules to survive. The study smells of expensive leather and old paper and something else. Cologne, maybe, or the particular scent of power that seems to cling to men like Taeseok. His desk is immaculate, organized with the precision of someone who controls chaos by containing it in perfect order. But it's what's in the locked drawer, which isn't actually locked, just stuck, that makes Amara's world tilt on its axis. Photographs, dozens of them, some old and fading, others more recent, and in the center of the pile, a series of images that make her breath catch in her throat. A young Western couple, clearly in love, standing outside what looks like a hospital in Seoul. The woman is pregnant, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The man has his arm around her, his face showing that particular expression of terrified joy that new fathers wear. Beneath the photos, a collection of documents, contracts, legal papers, most in Korean, but some in English. Amara's hands shake as she reads custody agreement, temporary guardianship, adoption proceedings, suspended, and there, at the bottom of the pile, a birth certificate with most of the information redacted in heavy black marker. Only 3 pieces of information remain visible: the date, November 15th, 2001. The hospital, Seoul National University Hospital. And at the bottom, in the space for identifying marks, someone has written in English, birthmark on left shoulder blade, shaped like a crescent moon. Amara's hand goes automatically to her left shoulder, to the mark she's carried her entire life, the one her foster mother used to trace with gentle fingers while telling her stories about being special, about being chosen. The room spins. The photographs blur. 23 years of questions suddenly have the shape of an answer, even if she doesn't yet understand all the pieces. She's so absorbed in the documents that she doesn't hear the footsteps in the hallway until it's too late. The door opens. Not locked after all. Or perhaps someone has a key. And Tae-seok stands there, frozen in the doorway, his face cycling through surprise, anger, resignation, and something that might be relief, all in the space of 3 seconds. "So," he says quietly, closing the door behind him with a click that sounds like a cell door locking. "You've decided to stop pretending ignorance." Amara scrambles to her feet, the birth certificate still clutched in her hand, her mind racing for explanations, excuses, anything that might justify this violation. But Tae-seok waves away her stammered apologies with a tired gesture that suggests he's been expecting this moment, perhaps even orchestrating it. "The couple in those photographs," he says, moving to the window and staring out at the garden where Min Kyung's prize roses bloom in perfect rows. "They came to Korea 24 years ago. He was a teacher. She was a nurse. They wanted to help, wanted to make a difference. They met someone here, someone who promised them opportunities, connections, a future." He pauses, his jaw tightening. "That someone was my wife's father, and I was the one who introduced them." The confession hangs in the air like smoke. Amara wants to ask 1,000 questions, but something in Tae-seok's posture, the way his shoulders curve inward, as if bearing an invisible weight, tells her to stay silent, to let him speak. "There was an accident," he continues, his voice going flat, emotionless, the way people sound when they're recounting trauma they've rehearsed too many times. Or that's what we were told to call it. The couple died. Their baby, just 3 months old, was placed in temporary custody. And then, he turns to face her, and his eyes are haunted, ancient with guilt. Then the baby disappeared. The paperwork was lost. The adoption agency suddenly had no records. It was as if she had never existed. "Why?" Amara whispers, the word barely audible over the roaring in her ears. "Why would someone do that?" Tae-seok's laugh is bitter, sharp as broken glass. "Because that baby had inheritance rights. Because her parents, before they died, had been made certain promises by certain people. Because when those promises were broken and the parents threatened legal action, they became inconvenient." He picks up one of the photographs, the couple smiling outside the hospital, and his hand trembles slightly. "I didn't know what was being planned. I swear to you I didn't know. But I introduced them to people who saw them as obstacles instead of human beings, and I carry that burden every day." Amara looks down at the birth certificate in her hands, at the date that matches her estimated age, at the hospital where she was supposedly found abandoned, at the birthmark description that matches the crescent moon on her shoulder blade. "And you think I don't think," Tae-seok interrupts, his voice sharp. "I know. The moment I saw that necklace, I knew. Your mother wore it in every photograph. She said it was a family heirloom, a symbol of freedom and flight. She wanted her daughter to have it, to always remember that she could soar above any circumstance." The tears come before Amara can stop them, hot and unstoppable. Years of grief for parents she never knew mixing with rage at a world that decided she was disposable. "Then why?" she manages between sobs. "Why hire me? Why bring me here if you knew?" "Because," Tae-seok says, and now his voice cracks, revealing the human underneath the businessman underneath the mask. "Because I have spent 23 years trying to find you, trying to make this right, and when your application came across my desk, when I saw your name, saw where you were from, saw your estimated age, I knew God or fate or whatever force governs this universe was giving me one chance at redemption." He crosses to his desk, pulls out an envelope, and hands it to Amara. Inside, more photographs. The couple with a baby, the woman's necklace clearly visible. The baby's face is turned toward the camera, and even at 3 months old, the resemblance is unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same shape of the nose, the same defiant set of the jaw. You never answered my question about the necklace honestly, Taesok says, and I understand why. Trust is earned, not given. But Amara, and yes, I know your parents named you that because it means eternal in their language. I need you to understand something. You are in terrible danger here. My wife doesn't know yet, but she will. She always finds out. And when she does, he trails off. But the warning is clear. The mansion wakes differently on the 7th morning of Amara's employment. Or perhaps it's just that she now notices things she was too overwhelmed to see before. The way the staff members whisper in tight clusters that dissolve the moment she approaches. How Hanjuri's eyes linger on her with something that looks disturbingly like pity. The manner in which Min Kyung has begun studying her during meals with the focused intensity of a scientist examining a specimen under glass. Rumors move through the household like invisible currents, carrying fragments of information that Amara catches in passing. Heard Director Park is back from Japan. Something about contested inheritance rights. Legal documents from 20 years ago suddenly resurfacing. The servants speak in rapid Korean they assume she can't understand, but Amara has been studying secretly, using a translation app on her phone late at night, building vocabulary from the conversations swirling around her like debris in a storm. It's Park Soo-jin, the young maid who had watched Amara's first humiliation with barely concealed glee, who accidentally provides the first real piece of the puzzle. They're folding linens together in the service room, a task Jury assigned to force cooperation between them, when Soo-jin's phone buzzes with a news alert. She reads it, gasps, and immediately tries to hide her screen, but not before Amara glimpses the headline. Prominent businessman Kwon Tae-seok faces investigation over historical property acquisition. What does that mean? Amara asks in careful Korean. The words still clumsy on her tongue but clear enough to make Soo-jin's eyes widen with the shock of being understood. You speak Korean? Soo-jin sputters, her face flushing red with the embarrassment of someone who has been caught talking freely about others who she assumed couldn't comprehend. A little, Amara replies, switching back to English. The article, what's it about? Soo-jin hesitates, clearly torn between the desire to gossip and the fear of consequences. Finally, the former wins. There's an old investor, Director Park Sung-ho, who worked with the family 20-something years ago. He disappeared after some business deal went bad, and everyone thought he'd left Korea for good. But now he's back, and he's filed papers with the courts claiming that Mr. Kwon's father-in-law stole property that was meant to go to foreign investors who died in an accident. She leans closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. They say there was a baby involved, that the property was supposed to be held in trust until the child came of age, but the baby vanished and the CO family took everything. The room tilts. Amara grips the edge of the folding table to steady herself, her knuckles going white with the pressure. A baby, she repeats, her voice barely functioning. What happened to the baby? Soo-jin shrugs with the casual indifference of someone discussing a plot point in a drama rather than actual human tragedy. No one knows. Some people say the baby died. Others say she was adopted out illegally, sent somewhere far away where she could never make claims on the inheritance. Mrs. Seo's father was very powerful back then. He could make problems disappear. She pauses, studying Amara with sudden curiosity. Why do you care so much? You look like you've seen a ghost. Amara fumbles for an excuse, her mind racing too fast for coherent lies. I just think it's sad. A baby losing her parents, and then losing everything else too. That evening, Kwon Da-on seeks her out for the first time, finding her in the garden where she's been sent to help the elderly groundskeeper, Mr. Kim, trim the azalea bushes. The teenager approaches with the awkward confidence of privileged youth, his designer sneakers crunching on the gravel path, his school uniform perfectly pressed despite having been worn all day. You're Amara, right? He says in English far better than most Korean teenagers his age, the accent shaped by expensive international schools and summers abroad. Can we talk? Mr. Kim glances between them, makes some calculation in his ancient wise eyes, and quietly withdraws to the far end of the garden, suddenly very interested in the koi pond. Da-on waits until the old man is out of earshot before continuing. I know you've been asking questions, he says, not accusatory, but matter of fact, as if stating an observable truth, about the family history, about things that happened before I was born. My mother thinks you're just curious, That you're nosy the way all servants are nosy about their employers." He pauses, his young face showing a shrewdness that seems wrong for someone barely 17. "But I don't think that's it. I think you're looking for something specific." Amara's hands freeze on the pruning shears. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Dayon presses, and there's no malice in his voice. Just genuine curiosity and something else. Maybe loneliness. Maybe the desperate need of a teenager trapped in a house of secrets to finally speak truth to someone. "I've lived in this house my whole life, and I've never seen my father look at anyone the way he looks at you. Like you're something precious he thought he'd lost. Like you're something dangerous he needs to protect." He sits down on the stone bench nearby, his teenage limbs folding with that particular graceless elegance of youth. "And my mother, she's scared of you. I can tell. She hides it under all that cold control, but I know her tells. You make her nervous in a way nothing else does." "Why are you telling me this?" Amara asks, abandoning pretense because this boy, this child of privilege and secrets, seems to see through her defenses with the clarity that sometimes comes before life teaches you to stop looking too closely at uncomfortable truths. Dayon shrugs, picking up a fallen azalea petal and twirling it between his fingers. "Because I'm tired of living in a house where everyone pretends. Where we have perfect dinners and perfect manners and perfect lies, and underneath it all there's something rotten that no one wants to name." He looks up at her, and his eyes are older than his years. "There's a room on the 3rd floor. East wing, last door on the left. It's been locked since before I was born. Even the cleaning staff isn't allowed in. But sometimes late at night I hear my father in there, just sitting, not doing anything, just existing with whatever's inside." Before Amara can respond, Hanjuri's voice cuts across the garden. "Miss Lewis, Mrs. Seo requires your presence in the main hall immediately." Dayon stands quickly, the moment of vulnerability closing like a door. "Be careful," he whispers as he passes her. "Whatever you're looking for, be sure you want to find it. Some truths destroy more than they liberate." The main hall is where Min Kyung stages her most important performances, and today she has assembled an audience. Several women in expensive hanbok and designer suits, members of Gimcheon's elite social circle, gathered for what appears to be a charitable foundation meeting. Amara is instructed to serve tea, to be the silent, decorative help that proves Min Kyung's household runs with flawless efficiency. But as Amara moves through the room with the silver tea service, she hears fragments of conversation that make her blood run cold. Such a scandal if it's proven. Director Park has actual documentation. The foreign couple's assets were never properly distributed. Imagine if an heir suddenly appeared after all these years. Min Kyung's laughter cuts through the whispers, bright and sharp as broken glass. "Ladies, please. These are old rumors being dredged up by a bitter man who lost his investment through his own poor judgment. There was no heir. The baby died with her parents. The court settled this matter decades ago. But one of the women, Mrs. Choi, owner of the largest textile factory in the region, doesn't look convinced. Still, Min Kyung, if someone did come forward with legitimate claims, your father's estate was built partially on those foreign assets. The legal implications would be, there is no one to come forward," Min Kyung interrupts, her voice taking on an edge that makes everyone in the room suddenly very interested in their teacups. "The matter is closed, has been closed for 23 years, and it will remain closed." As if sensing Amara's presence for the first time, Min Kyung's gaze snaps to her, and there's something new in those cold eyes. Not just disdain anymore, but calculation, suspicion, fear dressed up as contempt. "You," Min Kyung says, addressing Amara directly in front of all her guests, violating the social protocol that servants should be invisible. "Come here." Amara approaches, her heart pounding, the tea service trembling slightly in her hands. Min Kyung reaches out, and, with deliberate slowness, touches the chain visible at Amara's collar, the chain she thought she'd hidden, but which must have slipped free while she was working in the garden. "What an unusual necklace," Min Kyung says, her voice honey-sweet and poison-sharp. "May I see it?" It's not a request. Amara's hands move to unclasp it, but something in her rebels. "It belonged to my mother," she says, the words coming out stronger than she feels. "It's all I have of her." "Your mother," Min Kyung repeats, and the way she says it makes the room go silent, makes all the society women lean forward slightly, sensing drama, sensing blood in the water. "How fascinating. And what was your mother's name?" Before Amara can answer, before she can decide whether to lie or tell a truth she's only just beginning to understand, the front door opens with enough force to make everyone jump. Taeseok stands there, his suit disheveled, his face showing a rare crack in his usually perfect composure. "Min Kyung," he says, his voice carrying an authority that makes his wife's expression shift from predatory to wary. A word. Now. In private. As the couple disappears into Taeseok's study, the social gathering dissolves into excited whispers, and Amara, still standing in the center of the room with her mother's necklace clutched in her fist, feels the ground shifting beneath her feet, feels the careful architecture of lies beginning to crack, and knows that what comes next will either bury her or finally set her free. The envelope appears on Amara's pillow like a ghost's calling card. Crisp white paper, no return address, her name written in precise Hangul characters that seem to glow against the fabric in the dim light of her small room. She finds it after returning from the disastrous tea service, her hands still shaking from Min Kyung's predatory examination of the necklace, her mind still replaying Taeseok's urgent interruption. Her fingers tremble as she tears it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in English. "You are not here by accident." The words blur as tears fill her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of something more primal, a mixture of vindication and terror that comes from having your deepest suspicions confirmed by an anonymous source. Someone in this house knows who she is. Someone has been watching, waiting, orchestrating. But who? And more importantly, why now? A soft knock on her door makes her jump, shoving the note under her pillow. Han Juri enters without waiting for permission, her weathered face showing unusual agitation. "Mr. Kwon wants to see you," she says in Korean, then switches to English when she sees Amara's expression. "In his study. Now." "And child," she hesitates, her voice dropping to a whisper that carries decades of experience in houses where walls have ears. "Whatever he tells you tonight, remember that truth is a double-edged sword. Sometimes the blade cuts the one who wields it most deeply." The walk to Taeseok's study feels like a journey to execution. The mansion's corridors stretch endlessly, the expensive artwork on the walls transforming into judging eyes, the antique furniture becoming silent witnesses to whatever reckoning awaits. Amara's reflection catches in a gilded mirror, a young black woman in a maid's uniform, looking small and displaced against the backdrop of generational Korean wealth, and she barely recognizes herself. Taeseok's study door stands open, warm light spilling into the darkened hallway like an invitation or a trap. He sits behind his desk, but his usual perfect posture has collapsed into something more human. Shoulders hunched, tie loosened, a glass of whiskey catching the lamplight in his hand. When he sees her, he gestures to the chair across from him, the same chair where presumably important business deals are negotiated and life-changing decisions are made. "Close the door," he says quietly, and Amara does, the click of the latch sounding like a lock engaging or perhaps like chains breaking. She can't quite tell which. For a long moment, he simply studies her, his businessman's eyes now stripped of their calculated distance, revealing something raw underneath. "I've spent the last hour arguing with my wife," he begins, his English careful, each word weighted. "She wants you gone. Out of this house tonight, on the first bus back to Seoul, on the first plane back to America. She says your presence here is disruptive and inappropriate. What she means is that you're dangerous." "Dangerous?" Amara's voice cracks on the word. Don't," Taeseok interrupts, holding up his hand. "Please don't insult either of our intelligence by pretending you don't understand what's happening. You know, or at least you're beginning to piece it together. The dates align too perfectly. The necklace is too specific. And your face," his voice catches. "God help me, you have your mother's eyes. The same defiant spark, the same refusal to be diminished by circumstances that would break lesser people." He stands, moves to the window, his back to her as he continues speaking. "Director Park Sung-ho returned to Korea 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks before your application mysteriously appeared on my desk, already pre-approved by HR in a way that bypassed my wife's usual vetting process. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I saw the necklace, and I knew. Someone wanted us to collide. Someone wanted this confrontation. But who?" Amara whispers, her mind racing through possibilities. Who would orchestrate this? Taeseok turns, and his expression holds something like admiration. mixed with sorrow. Director Park, perhaps. Or maybe, and this terrifies me more, maybe you did, unconsciously. Maybe some part of you always knew where you came from, always knew you had to return to this place to find answers. He crosses back to his desk, pulls out a folder thick with documents. I've spent 23 years trying to locate you. I hired investigators, bribed officials, followed every lead, and then you simply appeared. Applied for a job in my household using your real name, your real history, as if daring the universe to notice. He spreads the documents across the desk. Official papers, legal filings, photographs. Your parents were David and Sarah Lewis. He taught English at a private academy in Seoul. She worked as a volunteer nurse at a free clinic in Itaewon. They met Director Park at a networking event, and he introduced them to my father-in-law, who promised to help them invest in Korean real estate as a way to build security for their growing family. His finger traces over a particular document. They signed contracts, put their savings into properties that were supposed to be held in trust. Then they started asking questions about where the money was actually going. They discovered the investments were fraudulent, that the properties didn't exist, that they'd been scammed by one of the most respected families in Gimcheon. And then they died. Amara finishes, her voice hollow. The official report says car accident. Single vehicle, lost control on a mountain road during a storm. Tae-seok's jaw tightens. But the investigator I hired found inconsistencies, brake lines that looked tampered with. A witness who recanted their testimony after receiving a large cash payment. And most damningly, your parents had scheduled a meeting with an international lawyer the day after the accident, planning to file criminal charges. The room spins. Amara grips the arms of the chair, her knuckles white. Your wife's family killed my parents. I don't know, Tae-seok says, and the admission seems to cost him something. I truly don't know. My father-in-law died 10 years ago, taking whatever truth he held to his grave. Min-kyung claims ignorance, says she was studying abroad when it happened, knew nothing about her father's business dealings, and maybe that's even true. Maybe she's as much a victim of circumstances as anyone. He doesn't sound convinced. But the baby, me, what happened after? You were placed in emergency custody. The plan was temporary foster care while they located relatives in America. But somehow, and this is where official records become suspiciously vague, you were moved from the first foster home within a week, transferred to a facility that has since closed, and then, he spreads his hands helplessly. Then you vanished from the Korean system entirely. Your case file is sealed, your adoption records are missing, and every official I've tried to bribe or convince tells me the same thing. The matter is closed, handled through proper channels, no irregularities found. Except I wasn't adopted through proper channels, Amara says, pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. I was trafficked, shipped to America with falsified papers, given to a foster system that assumed I was abandoned, not stolen. Someone erased me from Korea's records so completely that I might as well have never existed. Tae-seok nods slowly. And in doing so, they eliminated any claim you might have had on your parents' estate, on the properties that were supposedly held in trust for you, properties that my wife's family subsequently absorbed into their holdings. He pulls out one final document, a property deed dated 3 months after her parents' death. This building in Gangnam, now worth approximately $40 million, was purchased using funds from a trust that was supposed to be yours. The silence that follows feels like the moment before an earthquake, when animals go quiet, and the air itself seems to hold its breath. Amara stares at the deed, at the casual theft of an entire life's worth of security, and feels something fundamental shift inside her, from victim to someone with agency, from lost girl to woman with righteous claim. Why are you telling me this? She asks finally. Why not just send me away like your wife wants? Tae-seok meets her eyes, and she sees in his face the exhaustion of carrying guilt for 23 years. Because I introduced your parents to the people who destroyed them. Because I stood by while a baby was erased from existence to protect business interests. Because I've spent more than 2 decades building an empire on foundations stained with innocent blood, and I am so tired of being the kind of man who chooses comfort over conscience. He slides the folder across the desk toward her. These are copies. Everything I've found. Everything I know. It's not enough to prove murder in court, but it's enough to reopen questions about the property transfers, about your identity, about what really happened. If I use this, if I go public, your family loses everything. Amara says, understanding the magnitude of what he's offering. Yes, Taeseok agrees simply. My wife, my son, my reputation, all of it built on sand that was never meant to be ours. Perhaps it's time for the tide to come in. The confrontation happens at dawn, when the mansion is caught between darkness and light, existing in that liminal space where secrets become impossible to maintain. Amara hasn't slept. How could she? With a folder full of evidence burning like hot coals on her nightstand, with the truth of her existence finally taking solid shape after 23 years of being nothing but questions wrapped in flesh, she's in the kitchen preparing the morning coffee, a task she's learned to perform with the mechanical precision Min Kyung demands, when she hears the voices. Not whispers this time, but actual raised voices cutting through the expensive silence that usually blankets this house like snow over graves. Taeseok and Min Kyung, arguing in the study with a door that didn't quite close, their words in Korean, but their fury translating across any language barrier. Hanjuri appears beside Amara like a ghost, her elderly face creased with worry. Don't go near there, she warns in English, gripping Amara's wrist with surprising strength. When tigers fight, the wise mouse stays hidden. But Amara isn't a mouse, has never been a mouse despite years of being treated like one, and she finds herself drawn toward the sound of shattering porcelain and accusations sharp enough to draw blood. She stops just outside the study door, her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape. You brought her here deliberately. Min Kyung's voice cuts like a blade dipped in ice water. Don't lie to me, Taeseok. I've stood beside you for 18 years, borne your son, maintained your perfect house and your perfect reputation, and you repay me by importing the one thing that could destroy everything we've built. Everything you've built, Taeseok corrects, his voice quieter but somehow more dangerous, on foundations made of stolen lives and buried truth. Did you know, Min Kyung, when you signed those property transfers after your father died, when you absorbed those assets into your inheritance, did you know where they came from? A pause, loaded with the weight of unspoken history. When Min Kyung speaks again, her voice has changed, lost some of its sharp edges, revealing something underneath that might be actual human emotion. What I knew or didn't know is irrelevant. My father made decisions. He protected our family's interests in ways that were, perhaps not gentle, but necessary. That's what powerful people do. They make hard choices so that others don't have to. Hard choices, Taeseok repeats, and the bitterness in his voice could curdle milk. Is that what we're calling murder now? Hard choices? The word hangs in the air like smoke from a gun. Amara's hand flies to her mouth, pressing against the sob that threatens to escape. Murder. Not accident. Not misfortune. Murder, spoken plainly, confirmed in a way that makes the past suddenly, horrifyingly concrete. You have no proof of that, Min Kyung hisses. No one does. The investigation was closed 23 years ago. The case is settled, and that girl, that servant you've inexplicably brought into our home, even if she is who you think she has no legal standing, no documentation, no witnesses, just a necklace and a story. She has more than that now, Taeseok says quietly. I've given her everything I found, every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence I've collected over the years. Enough to reopen investigations, enough to put pressure on the prosecutors who were paid to look the other way, enough to... The sound of a slap echoes through the hallway, sharp and shocking. Then Min Kyung's voice, shaking with rage and something that might be fear. You would destroy your own son's future? Daeon's inheritance? Our family's name? For what? For guilt? For some misplaced sense of justice toward people who were stupid enough to trust the wrong people? For the truth, Taeseok responds, his voice barely audible now. Because I can't keep building tomorrow on yesterday's corpses. Because when I look at that girl's face, I see ghosts that won't stay buried. And because you, my wife, my partner, the mother of my child, you're standing here defending the indefensible, and I realize I don't know who you are anymore. Perhaps I never did. Footsteps approach the door suddenly, and Amara barely has time to step back before it swings open. Min Kyung stands there, her perfect hair slightly disheveled, her makeup cracked around the eyes, revealing the human underneath the porcelain mask. When she sees Amara, something in her expression shifts. Surprise, then calculation, then a kind of desperate fury. You, she breathes, advancing into the hallway with predatory grace. You've been listening. Of course you have. Servants are always listening, always watching, always waiting for moments of weakness to exploit. I wasn't, Amara starts, but Min-kyung cuts her off with a gesture so sharp it might as well be a blade. Don't lie. I'm tired of lies, tired of pretense, tired of everyone in this house performing innocence while plotting my destruction. She turns back toward the study where Tae-seok has emerged, his face showing a weariness that seems to age him a decade in the morning light. You want to know the truth? Fine. Let's speak truth. Yes, my father was involved in your parents' deaths. Not directly. He never dirtied his own hands. But he arranged it, paid for it, ensured it looked accidental enough that questions would fade with time. The confession lands like a bomb in the quiet hallway. Even Tae-seok looks shocked, as if he'd suspected but never expected actual admission. Amara feels her knees weaken, feels the floor becoming unreliable beneath her feet. Why? The word comes out as a whisper, all the air driven from her lungs. They were just people trying to protect their investment. Why kill them? Min-kyung's laugh is bitter, empty of humor, because they were going to expose him. Not just about the fraud, that could have been settled with money, but they'd discovered other things. Connections to politicians and judges, evidence of a network of corruption that stretched back decades. Your parents were naive idealists who thought documentation and determination could stand against institutional power. They were wrong. She turns to Amara, and for the first time, her expression shows something almost like regret. I was 20 years old, studying in Paris when it happened. I came home to find my father changed. Harder, colder, drinking more. He never told me directly what he'd done, but I knew. You always know, don't you? When someone you love has crossed a line they can never uncross? And the baby? Amara asks, her voice stronger now, fueled by righteous anger. What happened to me? My father wanted you dead too, Min-kyung says flatly, and the casualness of the statement is somehow more horrifying than any dramatic delivery could be. Simpler that way, he said. No loose ends. But the woman who was supposed to handle the foster care, she had more conscience than sense. She falsified paperwork, made you disappear into international adoption networks where you'd be impossible to trace. She thought she was saving you. Min-kyung's eyes narrow. She was arrested 6 months later on unrelated charges. My father's reach was very long. Tae-seok moves to stand beside Amara, not touching but present. A silent solidarity. What happens now? He asks his wife, and there's no affection left in his voice, just the weary tone of someone negotiating the terms of inevitable catastrophe. Min-kyung looks between them, her husband who has betrayed her for conscience, the girl who represents the sins of her father's generation, and something in her seems to calcify, hardening into the same cold determination that probably made her father so successful and so monstrous. Now, she says softly, now we see if truth really is stronger than power. If your documents and testimony and righteous anger can stand against lawyers and money and connections that reach into every corner of this country's institutions. She moves toward the staircase, then pauses. But understand this, both of you. If this family falls, we all fall together. Daeon loses his future. The workers who depend on our businesses lose their livelihoods. The charities we fund, the schools we support, the infrastructure of social capital we've built, all of it crumbles. So ask yourself, girl with the stolen name and the borrowed necklace, is your need for justice worth all those other lives? She ascends the stairs like a queen leaving her throne room, her spine perfectly straight, despite carrying the weight of her father's sins. And Amara stands in the hallway, clutching evidence that could topple an empire, realizing that truth, when it finally arrives, rarely comes clean and simple. It comes complicated, stained with the blood of the guilty and the suffering of the innocent. And the hardest part isn't finding it. It's deciding what to do with it once you hold it in your hands. The third floor of the Kwan mansion has always been forbidden territory, a realm of locked doors and unspoken rules that even the most curious servants learn to avoid. But on this day, with the household fracturing like ice under spring sun, Amara finds herself standing before the last door on the left of the east wing, the one Daon mentioned days ago that feels like years now. Her hand trembles as she turns the handle, expecting resistance, but the door swings open with surprising ease, as if it's been waiting for her all along. The room beyond steals her breath, not with grandeur, but with the preserved intimacy of a nursery frozen in time. Pale yellow walls decorated with hand-painted butterflies, A white crib draped with gossamer fabric that has yellowed with age, shelves lined with children's books in English and Korean, and in the corner, a rocking chair positioned by the window where sunlight streams through like a spotlight on an empty stage. "My father comes here," a voice says behind her. Dayon stands in the doorway, his teenage face showing a maturity that seems to have appeared overnight, as if the household's unraveling has forced him to grow up in the span of hours. Late at night, when he thinks everyone's asleep, he just sits in that chair and stares at nothing. I followed him once when I was younger, watched through the crack in the door. He was crying, actually crying, and I'd never seen him cry before. It terrified me. Amara moves deeper into the room, her fingers trailing over surfaces that Hanjuri has clearly maintained despite the door being locked. No dust, no cobwebs, just the careful preservation of a shrine to a child who disappeared. On the dresser, she finds a photograph she hasn't seen before. Herself as an infant, maybe 3 months old, held by her mother Sarah, with her father David standing beside them, his hand resting protectively on his wife's shoulder. They look so young, so hopeful, so completely unaware that in a few weeks they would be dead, and their daughter would become a ghost. "This was supposed to be your room," Dahan says quietly, entering and closing the door behind him. "My father had it prepared before your parents died, back when they were still planning to stay in Korea long term, when everything seemed possible. After the accident, he couldn't bring himself to dismantle it. My mother wanted to turn it into a storage room or a guest suite, but this was the one thing he refused her, the one place where his guilt was allowed to exist in physical form." Amara sinks into the rocking chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The chair creaks softly, a lullaby of aged wood and missed opportunities. "I don't know what to do," she admits, the words tumbling out like a confession to this teenager who somehow feels like the only honest person in a house built on lies. "Your father gave me evidence that could destroy your family. Your mother admitted that her father killed my parents, and I'm sitting in a nursery that was meant for me, surrounded by a life I was supposed to have, and I feel so empty, like I should be angrier, or sadder, or something more than this hollow numbness." Dayon sits on the floor near her feet, his expensive uniform looking incongruous against the old carpet. "My mother asked me this morning if I knew who you were," he says. "Not your name, but who you really are, what you represent." He looks up at her, and his eyes are his father's eyes, sharp, intelligent, burdened with knowledge that weighs more than it should. "I told her I didn't care. That's not completely true. I care a lot, actually, but not in the way she wanted me to. She expected me to be angry at you for threatening our stability. Instead, I'm angry at her, at my grandfather, at the whole rotten system that decided your life was worth less than our comfort." The confession hangs between them, honest and raw in a way that makes Amara's chest ache. "You'll lose everything if I go forward," she says. "Your inheritance, your family name, your future. Universities don't accept students whose families are embroiled in murder scandals. Friends disappear, doors close. I've researched this. I know what happens to children when their parents' sins become public." "Good," Dayon says simply, and the certainty in his voice is startling. "Maybe I need those doors to close. Maybe I need to build something that isn't constructed on foundations made of other people's stolen lives. You know what the worst part is? Growing up here, I always felt wrong, like something in the house was sick, poisoned, but I couldn't name it. Now I know. Now I finally understand why every achievement felt hollow, why every privilege felt like it came with invisible strings attached to suffering I couldn't see." A knock interrupts them, gentle but insistent. Hanjuri enters, and for the first time since Amara arrived, the older woman's carefully maintained neutrality has cracked. Her eyes are red-rimmed, her hands twist together anxiously. "I need to tell you something," she says in Korean, then switches to English, her accent thick with emotion. "Something I should have told someone 23 years ago, but was too afraid to speak." She moves to the window, staring out at the garden below as if gathering courage from the roses that bloom despite everything. "I was here when your parents died," she begins, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was younger then, just started working for the Seo family. The old master, Min Kyung's father, he received a phone call late at night. I was cleaning nearby, Heard him speaking in that cold voice he used when conducting unpleasant business. He said, "It's done. Make sure the brake failure looks natural. And the baby, take care of that problem by morning." Amara feels the blood drain from her face. Actual confirmation, from an actual witness, of premeditated murder. "Why didn't you say anything? Go to the police, tell someone." Jury turns, and tears stream down her face unchecked. "Because I was nobody. A servant from a poor family who needed this job to support my sick mother." The old master knew I heard. I could see it in his eyes the next morning. He called me into his office, put an envelope of money on the desk, and said, "Your mother's medical bills are expensive. It would be a shame if you lost your job and she lost access to treatment. Tragic things happen to people who speak carelessly." What was I supposed to do? Choose truth over my mother's life? The question hangs in the air, unanswerable, because both choices lead to someone's suffering. Amara understands this viscerally, understands that evil maintains power not just through violence, but through forcing good people into impossible moral positions where silence becomes survival. "But I saved something," Jury continues, reaching into her pocket with shaking hands. "The investigator's original report, the real one, before it was rewritten. The mechanic who examined your parents' car submitted findings that showed clear evidence of tampering. Those findings were buried, but I kept a copy, hidden for 23 years in the lining of my suitcase, because I told myself that someday, somehow, truth would matter again." She hands Amara a folded paper, yellowed with age but still legible, an official document with an official seal, documenting brake line sabotage, documenting murder disguised as accident. It's the missing piece, the evidence that transforms suspicion into proof, that gives teeth to all the other documents Taeseok provided. "Why now?" Amara asks, clutching the paper like a lifeline or a grenade. She can't quite tell which. "Why give this to me now?" Jury's smile is sad, worn with decades of complicity and regret. "Because I'm 68 years old, my mother is long dead, and I'm tired of carrying ghosts. Because you deserve to know that your parents were brave and good, and their deaths were not random tragedy, but calculated murder. And because," her voice breaks, "because that baby they wanted to eliminate grew up into a strong woman who came back to face the people who tried to erase her, and that takes a courage I never had. Maybe it's time someone in this house finally chose right over easy." Amara stands, the document in one hand, her mother's necklace still warm against her chest, and looks around this nursery that was supposed to be hers, at the books she never read, the crib she never slept in, the life she was supposed to live, and she makes a decision, not born from anger or revenge, but from a simple, profound need to exist fully in the world, to claim her name and her history, and her right to take up space. "I'm going to the authorities," she says quietly, "not for revenge, not even really for justice. I don't think anything can balance those scales, but for the record, so that somewhere, in some official document, it's written that David and Sarah Lewis existed, that they mattered, that their daughter survived and came home to tell their truth." The Gimcheon District Prosecutor's Office sits in a concrete building that speaks of bureaucratic efficiency rather than justice. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, and the particular smell of old paperwork, and resigned hopes that seems universal to government institutions everywhere. Amara enters with Taeseok beside her, his presence both shield and witness, carrying a folder that weighs almost nothing physically, but contains enough truth to rewrite decades of carefully constructed lies. Director Park Sung-ho waits for them in a small conference room, looking older than his 62 years, his face carved with lines that speak of battles fought and mostly lost. When he sees Amara, something in his expression cracks, recognition mixed with grief, as if he's seeing a ghost made flesh. "You have her eyes," he says in accented English, his voice rough with emotion. "Sarah's eyes. I told her once that her daughter would have those same eyes, strong and clear, and refusing to accept anything less than truth." They sit around a scarred wooden table, and Amara spreads out the documents like cards in a game where the stakes are measured in lives and legacies. The original investigator's report from Jury, the property transfer documents from Taeseok, the birth certificate with her parents' names, the photographs of a family that almost was. And finally, the testimony she's prepared, 23 years of absence transformed into presence, of erasure transformed into evidence. Director Park listens with a prosecutor named Kim Ji-won, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who has built a reputation for taking on cases that other prosecutors avoid, cases that involve powerful families and uncomfortable truths. She examines each document with the careful attention of someone who knows that details matter, that in the spaces between words and the dates on forms, entire worlds of corruption can hide. "This is substantial," Prosecutor Kim says finally, her Korean translated by Tae-seok, who seems to have aged a decade in the past week, his face showing the weight of choosing justice over comfort. The original investigator's report is particularly damning. Combined with the financial records showing property transfers that coincided suspiciously with your parents' deaths, and Mr. Kwan's testimony about what he witnessed during that period, she pauses, tapping her pen against the table. This could reopen not just your parents' case, but potentially dozens of other cases where the late Mr. Seo's business dealings resulted in convenient accidents and disappeared paperwork. "How long?" Amara asks, her voice steadier than she feels. "How long before something happens?" Kim's expression shows the practiced neutrality of someone who has learned not to promise outcomes in a system where power often trumps evidence. Investigations of this magnitude, involving families with this level of influence, it could be months, years even. There will be legal challenges, attempts to suppress evidence, pressure from people who have much to lose if this becomes public. She looks directly at Amara, and there's respect in her gaze. "You should know that this will not be easy. The SEO family's lawyers will attack your credibility, question your motives, suggest you're an opportunist seeking money rather than justice. They will make you wish you had stayed silent. Let them try," Amara says quietly, and she means it. She has spent 23 years being nobody, being a question mark in systems that prefer tidy narratives, and she has learned that sometimes the only power you have is the power to refuse erasure, to stand up and say, "I exist, I matter, my story is real." The meeting lasts 3 hours, each minute documented, each statement recorded, each piece of evidence logged into a system that will either validate or betray her trust in institutions. When they finally emerge into the afternoon sunlight, Amara feels simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because the burden of silence has been lifted, heavier because now the waiting begins, the long, uncertain process of watching truth compete with power. Tae-seok drives her back toward the mansion, but as they approach, Amara realizes she cannot return there, cannot sleep in that room or walk those hallways knowing what she knows, carrying what she carries. "Stop the car," she says suddenly, and he does, pulling over on a quiet street, lined with ginkgo trees dropping golden leaves like benedictions. "I need to leave," she says. "Today. Now. I cannot be in that house anymore." Tae-seok nods as if he expected this, reaches into his jacket, and pulls out an envelope. "I've arranged temporary housing, a small apartment near the university, paid for 6 months. There's also money for living expenses, and the contact information for a lawyer who will represent you pro bono if needed." He pauses, his hands gripping the steering wheel, as if it's the only thing keeping him anchored. "I know apologies are inadequate for what was taken from you. I know that my guilt, my complicity through silence and inaction, cannot be absolved by writing checks or providing testimony. But I want you to know," his voice breaks, shows the human underneath the businessman. "I want you to know that meeting you, even under these terrible circumstances, has given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, the possibility of redemption, even if I don't deserve it." Amara looks at this man who has chosen conscience over comfort, who has blown up his own life to help her reclaim hers, and feels something complicated, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. "What will you do?" she asks. "When this becomes public, when your family falls, I'll stand in the ruins and start building something new," he says simply. "I've already moved out, taken a small apartment downtown. Min Kyung has filed for divorce, and I won't contest it. Daeon," his voice softens with paternal love. "Daeon says he wants to come with me, wants to learn how to live without the weight of stolen wealth. Perhaps we'll be poor for a while. Perhaps that's what we need." They sit in silence for a moment, two people connected by tragedy and the choice to face it rather than bury it. Then Amara gathers her belongings. Still just that one worn suitcase, though now it contains documents that could topple empires, and steps out of the car. "Wait," Tae-seok calls, reaching into his glove compartment and pulling out one more item, A photograph in a simple frame. Her parents with baby Amara, taken in this very city, on a street not far from where they sit now. "This belongs to you," he says. "All those years I kept it. I was keeping it for you, hoping someday you'd come home to claim it." Amara takes the photograph, traces her fingers over her parents' smiling faces, and feels tears finally come. Not tears of anger or grief, but of something more complex. Sadness for what was lost, yes, but also gratitude for what survived. She survived. Her parents' love survived in this photograph, in her necklace, in the fierce determination that brought her across an ocean to find truth. She walks away from Tai Seok's car, down the street where ginkgo leaves fall like gold coins from a generous sky, toward a future that's uncertain, but finally, blessedly, hers to shape. Behind her, the Kwan mansion stands on its hill, still imposing, but somehow smaller now, its power diminished by the simple act of one person refusing to stay erased. At the corner, she stops and looks back one last time. Daeon has appeared on the street, running toward her with teenage awkwardness and urgency. He catches up, breathing hard, and thrusts a piece of paper into her hands. "My number," he says in English that's improving daily. "In case you need anything. In case you want to know how the story ends for those of us who stay." "How do you think it will end?" Amara asks, curious about this boy who chose truth over inheritance. Daeon's smile is sad but real. "Honestly, I think it will be messy and painful and nothing like the neat conclusions in movies. But maybe we'll all be more honest for it. Maybe that's enough." He hugs her quickly, an impulsive gesture that speaks of youth and hope, and the belief that broken things can be mended, and then runs back toward whatever future awaits him. Amara watches him go, then continues walking, her suitcase wheels scraping against the pavement, her mother's necklace warm against her heart, her parents' photograph tucked safely in her bag. The sun sets over Gimcheon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, and for the first time in 23 years, Amara Lewis exists fully in the world, not as a question mark, not as a stolen child, not as a servant with no past, but as herself, whole, real, undeniable. Her phone buzzes with a message from an unknown number. "Your story has only begun." She reads it, smiles slightly, and keeps walking toward whatever comes next. In the end, what remained inside that mansion was not a battle for status or legacy, but the haunting reminder of how fragile a life can become when truth is buried for too long. Amara walked away without raising her voice, without demanding an apology, yet her silence carried more strength than any confrontation ever could. She proved that sometimes the most powerful victory is simply choosing not to repeat the harm that once shaped you. And as she stepped beyond the gates of Gimcheon, the world finally felt wide enough for her story to breathe again. But ask yourself, if you were the one who discovered your entire past had been rewritten by the hands of others, what would you have done? Would you fight for justice or for understanding? Would you seek answers or protect your heart from breaking all over again? And above all, would you have the courage to walk away when staying would grant you the power to reclaim everything? Perhaps that is the quiet lesson behind Amara's journey, that healing does not always come from winning, exposing, or correcting the wrongs around us. Sometimes it comes from choosing who we refuse to become. And at the end of her long road, when she looked back only once, it was not to mourn what was taken from her, but to honor the strength it took to keep moving toward the life she deserved.